Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the history of a figure who honestly defies almost every expectation you could possibly have. We're talking about a guy who literally couldn't walk properly from birth, but somehow built an empire that stretched from the towering walls of Delhi all the way to the shores of the Mediterranean. This is a man who notoriously built massive pyramids out of tens of thousands of human skulls, yet incredibly, reportedly wept over a beautiful piece of Persian poetry. It's a story of absolute extremes.
So as we go through this, we really have to ask ourselves, was this conqueror, Timur, just a psychopathic monster? Or was he actually the last great nomad king? When you look at the primary sources, you find a guy who constantly forces us to grapple with that fine, terrifying line between brutal genius and unmatched cruelty.
I mean, his entire life is defined by this crazy tension. Get this, as a teenager, he permanently crippled himself during a skirmish trying to steal sheep. Literally sheep. Yet he rises from the absolute rock bottom of society to conquer the known world. It sounds exactly like a Hollywood script, but no, this is entirely drawn from the historical record.
Let's start with Part 1, the crippled nomad king.
To really understand him, we have to start with his origins. He claws his way up as a low-born youth, surviving and eventually thriving in the utter chaos of Central Asia, right after the mighty Mongol Empire fractured. History remembers him as Tamerlane, which comes from Timur Along, translating to Timur the Lame. And look, that wasn't just some mocking nickname from his enemies. It was his physical reality. His right hand and his right leg were heavily, visibly crippled. But here's the kicker. Despite severe physical limitations, the accounts tell us he still personally led terrifying, full-speed cavalry charges well into his 60s. I mean, wow.
Moving right along to Part 2, an unstoppable conquest.
Despite those crippled limbs, the guy was a military genius of the absolute highest order. The records show he never lost a single major battle. Not one, even when his forces were massively outnumbered. Now, if I say sweeping, rapid conquests, you probably think of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, right? Well, Timur actually conquered far more territory in just 35 years than the fearsome Mongol Empire managed in 50. The sheer velocity of his campaigns was just unprecedented.
Seeing the timeline really puts that unstoppable momentum into perspective. He starts around 1370 in Uzbekistan. By the 1380s, his armies are sweeping completely through Iran. Then in the 1390s, he pushes up into the Caucasus and all the way down into India. By 1402, he's dominating Anatolia. It wasn't just a march, it was a relentless tidal wave across the global map.
Which brings us to Part 3, Pyramids of Skulls.
Now, that rapid expansion, it relied on something deeply unsettling. This is the exact point where our narrative sharply shifts from, a gritty underdog story right into pure historical horror. His speed on the map was fueled by shocking, highly calculated terror tactics. Historians estimate that Timur's campaigns completely eradicated roughly 5% of the entire global population at the time. Let that sink in for a second. 5% of the planet. That translates to an estimated 15 to 20 million deaths. It's a death toll so massively staggering that it actually surpassed the devastation of the Black Death in Europe.
He wasn't just defeating armies out there, he was wiping out entire populations. The contemporary accounts highlight the sheer terrifying scale. In Delhi, in 1398, they record that 100,000 Hindus were killed before noon, on a single day. In Damascus, he had 3,000 Christians beheaded. And in Accra, in 1402, he defeated the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid, who had completely crushed the Crusaders just decades earlier, and famously captured him and kept him locked in a cage.
The terror totally went beyond the battlefield, too. He literally used human remains as construction material for psychological warfare. After sacking the city of Isfahan in Iran, Timur notoriously ordered 70,000 severed heads to be cemented together to build these macabre towers. It was a crystal-clear, horrific message to anyone else even thinking about resisting him. And yet, there's Part 4, the paradoxical patron. Because right alongside this unfathomable brutality, we find a man who is incredibly contradictory. Remember, this is the same warlord who ordered mountains of skulls, but who also reportedly wept over the beauty of Persian poetry. On one hand, wholesale slaughter of entire cities. On the other hand, he carefully spared and imported, well, actually imported is too nice a word, he forcibly dragged the finest artists, astronomers, and architects from Persia India and Anatolia straight back to his capital of Samarkand to build a cultural utopia.
He displayed these wildly contradictory behaviors that are honestly so hard to wrap your head around today. In one breath, he'd free prominent scholars, showing immense, genuine respect for their intellect. But then, in the very next breath, he would ruthlessly enslave those exact same scholars' children. It's this bizarre psychological split between deep reverence for high culture and absolute sociopathic control.
And you know what? That vast cultural patronage, entirely built on the back of all that conquest, did result in some breathtaking architectural wonders. Most notably, the stunning Gur-e-Mir mausoleum in Samarkand. It remains one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture in the region to this day. A brilliant jewel of a building, funded entirely by a trail of blood.
Finally, Part 5, the final irony.
This brings a definitive, almost shocking twist to his supposedly unstoppable momentum. At the age of 68, this undefeated conqueror who crushed literally everything in his path just died. He caught an illness while marching his massive armies eastward to invade Ming China. The unstoppable force simply stopped in its tracks.
He left behind this chilling tomb inscription that boldly warned, "If I were alive, the world would tremble." Talk about projecting power from beyond the grave, right? He desperately wanted his terror to outlast his physical body.
But history delivered the ultimate plot twist here. Despite the 20 million dead, despite vast lands conquered from India all the way to the Mediterranean, his massive, meticulously built empire completely collapsed. Within a single generation after his death, it was gone. Without his sheer will and terror holding the whole shebang together, it just dissolved.
Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought to ponder regarding this brutal genius. Is a conqueror truly great if his entire life's work, purchased at the astronomical cost of 20 million human lives, just vanished into the sands of history in 30 years? It's a profound question about legacy, power, and the true cost of empire. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a fresh, structured look at one of history's most terrifying and endlessly complex figures. See you next time.